Give us a minute. Yes. Am I live? Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody in person, everybody. And hello, everybody live stream, everybody. It's so good to be back. It's so good to welcome everybody into 2022. And just for those of you who don't know, my name is Fred Rode. I'm the CEO of Heavy Chef, which is the event that we're having here, just in case anybody just wandered in here aimlessly and somebody just clicked on a random YouTube link. So just a brief introduction before I hand over to our two illustrious speakers tonight. My role as CEO is of a learning platform called Heavy Chef. Heavy Chef is our aim, our big goal is to be the best in the world at bite-sized chunks of learning for entrepreneurs. Our core belief is that entrepreneurs can change the world for the better. We're a firm believer in bottom-up change, which is essentially what we're trying to inspire and empower this legion of entrepreneurs in our community to affect in society today. Lord knows that we have a lot of challenges, certainly in South Africa, where we are based today. And we'll be waiting a long time if we wait for top-down change. So that's what we're all about. We really want to inspire and empower people who are wanting to change the world. And that, essentially, in our view, are the entrepreneurs. So the three core pillars of Heavy Chef: technology, leadership, and creativity. Those essentially create and compile all the various topics within the Heavy Chef learning platform, TLC, as we call it, Tech, Leadership, and Creativity. And for those of you who are watching and those of you here, many of you are already members of heavychef.com. Please do go sign up to the platform. There's a huge amount of learning on there. Just some beautiful topics, great subjects to deep dive into and consume at your leisure. And plus, the added bonus is that there's a bunch of benefits attached to it. So one of them is that you get free tickets to in-person events. Whoop. So welcome everybody here who's braved the wild to actually get here. And I really encourage those of you who are watching online today to come out of your remote working studios, those very elaborate pot plant adorned sanctuaries that you've created in your houses, and get amongst it with your fellow entrepreneurs. And I encourage peer-to-peer learning and communication and interaction, which is really what we're all about. So there's a bunch of events coming up. In February, we've got Investing in Women. We have, in March, the Yappy Chef story with the two Yappy Chef founders. In April, we've got two of the most exciting storytellers in South Africa, Lauren Bierkus and Mahale Mashiko. We then have Teams, Culture, and Technology with Mike Perk and Amanda Jordan. And we have in May, we've got public speaking with two public speaking world champions, Verity Price and previous world champion Mark Brown, who will be patching in from, I think, Jamaica. I'm not too sure, but some exotic spot on the planet. And Verity will be joining us in person. So there's just so much good stuff coming up. And before I exit stage left, I I just want to honor our partners, the people that really make this possible and who have supported us from the beginning over the past couple of years through all the ups and downs and all the strangeness of COVID. We've had, it just occurred to me, I think the last time we had an in-person event with Dion and Bron was at Discovery, was it not? And we had like several hundred people in a massive auditorium. And so, you know, I don't know, I actually kind of prefer this, where we've got like a handful of intimate people close up and in person. So the people that I really just want to, just before I get off the stage, just say thank you to are the partners that have made it possible through all the ups and downs, particularly PayFast and Xero, who support our events. xneelo, Retail Capital, Digital Planet, We Grow SA, HP Store, Workshop 17, which is this amazing venue, and they've been a partner with us from the beginning. Backsberg Wine, some of you have already tucked in there. I've had a glass. Surf Fruit, Goodleaf CBD Water, Parcel Ninja, Creed Living, which provide a whole bunch of amazing healthy snacks for entrepreneurs. Howler, Black Magic, who the amazing crew up top there, just making it all look good. Xero, and our latest partner, Eclipse Communication, who handle our media and communications. So thank you to everybody there. And just a quick note, just to say, I'm really, really stoked to have Dion and Bronwyn back up on stage. These are two of my favorite humans on the planet. I just love their thoughts and their views on the world. They're super friendly, but also quite prickly. They're both a bit weird, and they're just unbelievably smart about so many things. And I love these events. They're some of my favorite events, just because we get to really investigate such a wide scope and scale of topics. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dion to come up to stage, and can we all give him a wide, loud applause?
Hi everybody, and hello everybody out there online, and everybody here in the room. I'm going to get straight into it. So what I'm presenting tonight, and what we've done with Fred for the past, I don't know, 3 years or so, my section is called The State We're In. So it's a presentation we do at Flux Trends every year. We theme it very differently. As you'll see, this year's theme is the re-entry tango. I'll explain that to you. But I'm going to go through rather quickly 6 trend pillars. We use the acronym TRENDS, TRENDS, and that stands for technology, retail, the state of the economy, the natural world, diplomacy, and social and cultural trends. So in essence, it's an executive summary of where we are and where the hell we are going into, and it's getting very, very interesting. So why the re-entry tango? So the tango is characterized by really snappy head turns and very, very sort of staccato movements. So it's quick, quick, slow, slow, quick, quick, slow, slow, and that is kind of what 2020 is going to do. And if you've tried to travel in December, then you'll know that it is a bit of a tango to try and get anywhere. So that's really where the starting point of where we are. And so I want to start off, before I get into the first pillar, is we are all suffering from something called worry burnout. And we need to learn a bit of re-entry etiquette. So the worry burnout, basically psychologically, they said for the past 2 years, and that's a long time, 24 months, to be at a heightened level of threat and fear. So they're saying, and you can see it, that half the people are scared of getting COVID, and the other half are scared of being controlled. So either way, it's a bit of a dynamic that has caused a lot of tension, and you might have friends and families who there's been a line that's been cleaved between vaccine, anti-vaccine, all of those kind of things. It is a really polarizing things. But in terms of that, and the re-entering anxiety, is that we are starting to see marked, really sort of high levels of aggression. So people are snapping very quickly. I've got a lot of friends who are in the airline business, the aviation business, and I know that there are several of them that are actually having martial arts defense courses to deal with customers like that. The restaurant staff who are just only happy to open their restaurants are also being abused by people. Teachers are being abused by the parents and their charges as well. And basically, it's very, very traumatic for everybody. So the message is be nice, because everyone's a bit stressed, and we are all suffering from worry burnout. So let's start with technology. So the first thing is that really we've all acknowledged that we moved 5 years, we advanced 5 years in 1 year in 2020. So we need to kind of meet the velocity of change, or businesses have to meet the velocity of change. And we've seen the metaverse is suddenly a really, really busy place. So I call this the rush hour on the metaverse. Everybody's charging in to the ether to try and stake their claim there. So big brands all over the world, Nike, Ralph Lauren, Disney, Walmart, everybody's trying to get in and start doing that. So a lot of you can also see retailers are starting to do that, and big money's been spent. So SoftBank is one of the big ones. They invested about $150 million in the South Korean metaverse platform, Zepto. So we're starting to see a lot of big companies go into that, and also big car brands. We've been tracking that, are sending sort of virtual cars into that, and those are Maserati, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce. So these are not insubstantial brands that are playing in the metaverse. Excuse me. Governments are also joining in the metaverse. So there are 2 countries that have decided to stake claim. Barbados was one of the first ones to say that they are declaring real estate sovereign land by creating a Barbados embassy in Decentraland, which is one of the big virtual places. So Decentraland and Sandbox are the 2 names that you'll hear often. And Seoul in South Korea has also decided to create it's called Metaverse Seoul, and basically it is public services but digitized and everything. So it's an extension from what happened during lockdown, which is e-diplomacy. So now we're just going one step further into kind of embassies and real estate and stuff in the metaverse. So one of the interesting things, in last year's State we're in, we covered the integration of robotics. So now we're getting to see a lot more AI coming through. So a new job description, if you are looking for something to do, is to become an AI bias bounty hunter. It's a bit of a mouthful, but in essence, we are starting to see, so AI's sort of crept into our lives very, very seamlessly. So we're looking at anything from assisting for maths homework, for people at school, to essential part of retail to kind of preempt what you're going to buy. But also, and where this has come from, is automating recruitment tools. But then we've discovered that whoever programs the AI programs their own bias into that. So we're starting to see that we need to take that out. So one of the first jobs that I picked up about a year ago, or 18 months, I don't know, one forgets, sort of like it's lockdown brain. It could have been 2 years, could have been 1 year, I'm not sure. But basically the New York Police Department were looking for a chief algorithmic officer. It was about 18 months ago. And the job of that chief algorithmic officer was to actually look for AI bias in their recruitment tools. So there's AI bounty for the hunters. So Twitter a while back was offering a cash bounty to those who could detect any AI bias within their algorithm, and you would receive $3,500 for doing that, because they actually found out that that algorithm favored white people and males. So surprise, surprise, that was there. So each of these little pillars, I'm going to give you a little bellwether. So the bellwether is just so that you know that I'm not smoking my socks or drinking too much CBD water that we've been presented there, but it is happening. So when I talked about robot integration, there's 3 categories. So one is hospital or healthcare service bots. Then there are the hospitality, restaurant bots, and then service and maintenance bots. So this one you'll see here is a restaurant in America. They found out, because there's a labor shortage, when they started employing more robots to take food to the tables, their waiters were getting higher tips, because you could actually spend more time chatting to people, and humanizing business is one of the big things that came out of the pandemic. But the bellwether is that Amazon's web service has started creating something called the Internet of Things for robotics. So it's called the Robot Runner, Internet of Things, and it is to manage, for big companies, your fleet of robots. And that's important because sometimes you've got different generation robots, and what the Internet of Things Robot Runner is to integrate all of your robotic staff, let's call them that, your cobots, in order to do that. All right, next pillar, retail and marketing. So we've learned that obviously everybody's kind of being a lot more comfortable with online shopping, e-commerce, that kind of thing during the pandemic, but the contactless economy that was spawned is growing and growing and is not going to go away. So if psychologists say that it takes 21 days to embed a new behavior in your head, 2 years means it's really cemented very, very solidly there. So what you're starting to see, and this is South Korea again, I mean, real high-tech country, is they have proposed, this is a government proposal, that they want an untaxed society, which means a totally contactless society, and they are actively encouraging this, specifically in retail environments, so you will go into stores and stuff and really not have any human contact. I'll leave that with you, be how you feel about that or not, but it is happening. So that's the South Korean one. So while we are stepping away from people, we are also stepping away from real protein. So it's been in the making, it's been on the flux radar for a long time, but plant-based foods, but more specifically and more recently, lab-grown proteins. So Singapore was the first country to actually offer lab-grown chicken, or was a plant-based chicken, but that was by delivery, so you could get that. So that was commercially available. So it's still been little niche pockets. It hasn't really scaled commercially. But this month, on the 10th of January, KFC have, in America, have launched Beyond Chicken. So it is the first nationwide, and when we're talking America, that's a very large country, first nationwide release of plant-based chicken under the KFC brand. So that is a big little signifier of what's happening. And then one of the sort of the epicenters of lab-grown proteins is in Israel, and the company is called Future Meat. And what they've done in the last 10 months of last year was to be able to bring the prohibitive price of the chicken from about $7.50 down to $1.70. So what they've done is made sure that the production, which is what was inhibiting all of this, of lab-grown meats to do that. And in South Africa, we've also got Mzansi Meats, which is our own company that does lab-grown. So it's not that far-fetched, so these things are really, really happening. What the pandemic has done, besides make us really, really angry, is to make us very, very impatient. So, so I'm a big fan. Checker 6060, it works. The first time I ordered, I was amazed that my groceries arrived in 35 minutes. So thank you, good brand promise there. But it's getting a little bit more crazy. So we can't wait an hour now. So the big thing internationally is a 10-minute grocery delivery service. And there's big money in it. So it's a Turkish company who's one of the sort of the biggest. They've been trialing this for the past couple of years. They're already in 6 European countries, and they've raised about $1 billion of venture capital money to get that. So they understand that everybody really wants things now. When you say on demand, we mean on demand now, 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 now. But it's given even faster. So what you're seeing on screen is a new algorithmic on-demand food service. So TikTok is getting into food as well, and they've partnered with this food delivery service. But the little twist here is that they will curate the menu from whatever goes viral on TikTok. So be careful of what really crazy stuff that you put on TikTok, because it could just end up as a menu, and people could be eating that stuff. So, so there we go, faster and faster and faster, more algorithms, more AI, and letting your menu be crowdsourced through viral TikTok feeds. So that's more and more bizarre. So here's my bellwether for retail. In 2021, we saw the very rapid escalation of, it first was just big brands creating little avatar skins so you could dress your avatar in games. to do that. And these were also big brands. So Valentino, Gucci, Balenciaga were all entering the metaverse to give you many avatar skins. That, well, we're so impatient, so that got very bored quite quickly. And then, so the new thing is digital fashion. So a lot of brands are getting into that. We've already, in 2021, spawned a little host of digital-only fashion brands. So these are your brands that you will overlay with augmented reality. You'll never own the clothes physically, but you'll look fabulous on Instagram anyway. But so this is the bellwether is the service is direct to avatar. So never mind sort of going anywhere else, but you are purchasing specifically for your social media avatar to do that. All right, here comes the sad part, the state of the economy, and it is a bit of an icky one as well. So we know that supply chains are just a wreck. If you are, as I am, a fan of Woolworths muesli, you know that for the past 2 months you just can't get any of that stuff anyway. So you try and look for alternatives. So while they're doing that, and it's important because Japan has actually appointed a Minister of Economic Security just to look out for supply chains and just manage these supply chains. But while companies are trying to look for their own supply chains, and that's changed as well. So if you're in manufacturing or if you're importing stuff, it's basically the business model was just in time, and now the sort of supply chain is just in case. So we've learned from the pandemic that things can go horribly wrong. So this is a good way to do this. And here's the depressing part of it as well. So I call it the middle class mirage. So we know that during the pandemic, the 1% got exponentially filthy rich, and the poorer just got destitute. And the middle class is just proving to be a mirage, and we are disappearing. So here in South Africa, this was a brand map survey in 2021 that basically between 2017 and 2020, already, so this was even pre-pandemic with a lot of people losing their jobs and livelihoods, we declined, what we classify as the middle class, declined from 6.1 million people down to 2.7 million people. So it's a huge kind of reduction of who we thought. So it's just over 55% reduction of who we reckoned was in that middle class. So the knock-on effects are a little bit worrying. Actually, they're very, very not a little bit, very worrying. So there's an increase in payday loans. So basically you are forwarding or you're asking for an advance on your paycheck, which you can just imagine starts spiraling out of control because the more you borrow, the more you're going to have to pay it back. And if you can't make it to the end of the month, loaning it is not going to help anymore. And then, depends on your age, especially out there, is the buy now, pay later model. So we just kind of know it as lay-bys, but it's essentially buy now, pay later is growing and growing and growing. But again, the problem is it doesn't solve the problem of what you have. In Australia, they found that 15% of buy now, pay later users take out another loan to pay off that loan. So you're just getting more and more into debt, whereas in the UK, they also found that 10% of their users overdrew on their accounts. So it's really not helping. And because we're in a digitized, contactless economy era, we now have digital loan sharks who generally prey on countries or communities that don't have financial literacy and they don't read the small print, and basically your interest rates are up to 500% annualized interest rates. So if you default on something, you are really, really not in a good place. And then I'm sure Bronwyn will cover this more succinctly than I'm doing, is decentralized automated organizations, DAO. So essentially, it is for internet native businesses that are wanting to go away from traditional and establish things, so banking, all of those things, and you're kind of doing it on your own. My way of putting it and understanding it is, imagine if a stock fell and blockchain technology had a child. That is kind of what your decentralized automated organizations are, but we're starting to see a lot of that and just saying, you know what, I don't want to be part of the establishment, and we are doing that, and because of blockchain technology, there are checks and balances which you can be able to do that. What we're tracking is the other big trend that came through was sustainability, sort of snuck up on us during the past 2 years, and now there is a new carbon economy. But it is a little bit of a murky economy. So there are sort of basically 3 ways of doing this. So there's carbon tracking. So if you haven't already on the foods you buy in the supermarkets, you will see a carbon label for everything. Milk, whatever. There's even a Norwegian company that puts carbon label tracking on their furniture, so you know exactly where your armchair comes from or whatever. Then there's carbon capture, which is, for me, quite interesting. So people are capturing CO2 and then they are converting it. So Nestle is one of the big companies. They are creating baking soda out of carbon emissions, so you're doing to do that. And then the one that is just, that's where it just gets a little bit not sure, is carbon trading. So what I mean by carbon trading is, so if you're a farmer, you can say, I'll make money by selling credits to companies to offset their emissions. So I'll plant some good things and trees, carbon absorbing crops, and then you say to a company, you can own those crops and you pay me for that, and then you can feel better because you've offset your carbon things, which they don't really do. So that is getting a bit murky. My bellwether for the economy pillar is really virtual realty. So we know about virtual reality, but then suddenly virtual real estate is a big thing now. So it's kind of probably the NFTs of 2021, so virtual reality is the 2022 kind of thing. On the left-hand side here of what you're seeing on your screen is Decentraland, and those are the properties you can buy. The record in Decentraland is somebody paid $2.4 million for a property in Decentraland, and then somebody found out that Snoop Dogg owned a property and wanted to be his neighbor, so then they paid $400,000 to be Snoop Dogg's neighbor there, because knowing your neighbors, even in virtual economies, is a good thing. You need to do that. But on the right-hand side, you can just see there's a little bit of a graph to just show where that virtual economy is going. All right, the natural world, since we are in a pandemic, let's just deal with these things here. So climate change is in everybody's mindset. So thanks, Greta. We really got this understood here now. But it's interesting because they said just in the last 18 months or the last 12 months, the language of media houses on both sides of the Atlantic has started to change. So climate change has been swapped for climate catastrophe or climate emergency. So there's a very, very distinct change, and it's across all kind of media. So whether they're sort of left or right of the fence, everybody is saying emergency, emergency, emergency. But also countries are starting to understand that it is a threat to national security. So what happens, and we've just had it in Madagascar, when you have a huge famine, which is climate change induced, and suddenly food security just is one of your major problems. We're getting all of these hottest weather in so many years, coldest weather in so many years. We've seen all the extreme weather. But what really interests me is the change in terroir. So terroir is, so if you are buying a really nice fancy French wine and it comes from the Bordeaux region, that is their terroir. It is specific to that region. What climate change is doing is warping the terroir. So suddenly, you might think, well, it's a bit hotter this season. It doesn't really matter. It matters hugely, because if it's hotter or colder, it changes the sugar content of that grape, which then changes the taste of that grape. So the subtleties of that terroir are suddenly non-existent. So what do you do if you've based your entire industry and your family heritage brand on that terroir, and it's gone? So I also read an article about an Italian wine farmer who's now growing avocados because their wine's just not happening. And even insurance companies in South Africa have this as a big bleep on their radars, because suddenly flood insurance, climate change insurance, all of that is starting to do that. So talking of that insurance, we are starting to get, we've now used to pandemic lockdowns, but there are also climate lockdowns. So this is more pollution related. So you might be asking me, what's the link between the climate and pollution? So if there is an air system, say an area of high pressure, that is above a certain region, that means the air changes. So there's not a wind that blows that pollution away. So in a place like New Delhi, where they had one of the first climate lockdowns a couple of months ago, schools were asked to shut for an entire week. Construction workers who were working outside, they were told to stop for 3 or 4 days. And basically, they said it's compulsory to work from home because of the pollution which is caused by climate change. So we're getting climate change lockdowns, we're getting climate refugees who just can't actually take living in a heat dome or an extreme winter state, so they've actually just moved away from where they are and they can't stay there anymore. And then you've heard of flexitarian. I'm a flexitarian. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm a bit of a flexitarian. I'll do plant-based mostly, and then I'll do some meat. But now you've got climatarian diets. So these are people who make their food choices that specifically reduce their carbon footprints of their meals. So are you a climatarian? That's a good question. My bellwether here is a really interesting one and quite a sad one at the same time. Earth has now got a black box. So you know the black box in aviation, so if the plane crashes, and hopefully they can find the black box, they will find out what happened in the last fatal moments of the crash. So it's a bit of a bellwether to know that Earth has a black box. So it's rather a beautiful thing, actually. But it's made from 7.5 centimeter thick steel. It's cantilevered on granite. It's got solar panels. And basically what it starts recording are land and sea temperatures, ocean acidification, atmospheric CO2, species extinction, and then land use changes. But then on the other thing, thanks to AI, it also looks at newspaper headlines, social media posts, and news from key events. And we'll put it all together, and then we will find out that if the proverbial just happens to this planet, then we'll at least know what happened to it if they can find us in the galaxy somewhere. All right. The penultimate thing of trends, diplomacy. So this is really interesting. So 2020, just before we went into the pandemic, the state we're in title was The Politics of Rage and Polarization. So 2 years on, we are fully raged and fully polarized. So it's going to be very, very interesting indeed. So talking about rage, with the whole little thing in Ukraine bubbling up there, and we're just kind of seeing if who's going to blink first or who's going to fire first. But now I thought it'd be interesting to see what the different types of warfare are in 2022. So you've got military warfare, which is what is happening in Ukraine. We know about trade war. You've got geopolitical or cold wars, which we understand. Then we're starting to get into that digital age. So we've got technology or cyber wars, which are interesting, and that's kind of being played out at the moment. Since 2009, so in the last decade, there's been about 500 really big geopolitical cyber attacks happening. So that's quite an amount in 10 years. But now it's getting very subtle. So one of the nuances, and it's called hybrid warfare, is lawfare. So you're using law, contracts and stuff to fight, but on a government level. So this is about stealing IP, those kind of things. You see the sort of battle between your big tech giants with different companies, all of those kind of things are happening. And then the real murky one is migrant or refugee warfare. So you are weaponizing migration. And we saw that at the end of last year, where 55 flights a week landed at Minsk airport in Belarus and then pushed into the Eurozone just to cause even more confusion with refugees. So that's a bit of a slippery slope, because you're starting to play with people who are completely desperate, and you're using that as a tactical warfare way of doing things. Oh, and robots as well. The Indian border, because they also got a bit of a spat going with killer robots. Charming. So these things can, well, they kill rather effectively. They're sort of machine gun wielding robots that can just take you out if you dare cross that border. So I wanted just to look at what's happening in 2020. It's really interesting. So this is an inflection year in terms of elections around the world. And these are elections that could change the course of geopolitics. So France, they've never had a president who's ever gone from one term and has survived a re-election. So they're having an election. Australia is having their first election since 2019, and we all know what's happened since 2019, so that's good luck to them. Brazil is having one. That's a big one as well. So President Bolsonaro, he's been accused of crimes against humanity because of his treatment of the pandemic. So let's see where they go with that. South Korea is having one, and that will see if they trust the Democratic Party that's been in power for 5 years. On the continent, Kenya's having an election, and we knew how chaotic the 2017 one was. It was like a rerun, all of those kind of things. So holding our breath for that. Colombia and Philippines also having one. And here in South Africa, we're not having a national election, but the ANC is having not only a big conference, but then the national leadership in December, which means nobody's going to be attending to any service delivery issues while that's happening there. And the same with America and India. They're not having national elections, but there are midterm elections in the US. That could change a whole lot of things. And India's general election is 2024, but then they also got state assembly votes that could sway a whole lot of things. So all over the world, elections that could change the way we're doing things. But we're kicking back and relaxing as well. So, Flux, I'm very happy to say, we in September moved into a 4-day work week. So this has been a big thing for everybody, like how did you do this, what is happening? But all around the world it's happening. Companies, so Bolt is one of the big fintech companies. They started in January. Spain is on a 3-year pilot to do this. Scotland is trialing that. Ireland is doing a 4-day work week trial with 20 different companies. The UAE has dipped their toe in. They're doing a 4.5-day work week, so it's just a little bit there, but at least it's a move forward. But in essence, so just to give you my big motivation spiel, because everyone's like, why do you do this? So if you think about it, the 40-hour work week was switched from an 80-hour work week because in the Industrial Revolution, factory workers were just being worked basically to death. So they said, you can't do that, let's halve it to 40 hours there. Then Ford Motors in the 1920s said, let's do a 5-day work week, so we did that. And then it was kind of sealed as a deal in the American Public Contracts Act of 1936. And then the whole world adapted to a 40-hour, 5-day work week. So my question is, why are we still using a metric used for factory workers in the Industrial Revolution for knowledge workers in the 21st century? And if you really need to argue the point is, and we've all found this out with screen fatigue, is in a digital age, your knowledge workers, your optimum focus time is 6 hours a day. You can't go beyond 6 hours to do that. So there are different ways of doing it. You can shave off hours during the week. I was on a radio program and somebody phoned in. They said, yes, we've done this, and we asked all of our staff, are you prepared to work 4 days and 10 hours a day? And I said, I'm sorry, but I disagree with that, because what's the point? You're still working on a 40-hour work week template, so we need to break that. So going back to warfare, my bellwether for this one is an interesting one, meme warfare. So this is the Chinese army on TikTok, on the Indian border, having some fun, but also showing we're here, and this is what it looks like. Not as scary as it might look, but it's there. So meme warfare is a thing. Okay, my last pillar, and I know I'm just gone a bit over time, the socio-cultural trend. Here's an interesting one. There are more singles, non-parents, and new nuclear families that have just developed over the last 2 years. So essentially, women are saying, sorry, I'm not having kids. And this is going around the world. So in South Korea, Seoul is offering 25,000 in rents, 25,000 rand if you have a baby in 2020. They're just trying to get the population up. China's demographic is starting to slide. They're getting really worried about that because it's a ripple effect of their one-child policy. They've got an aging population, women who are saying, I don't want babies. So they, in terms of manufacturing and industry, they are switching and pivoting to producing adult diapers. Now, there's a bit of a bellwether for you if a country says that's what we're going to go for, and the UK population decline is also going to go in 3 years as well. But the concept, because of lockdown, your lockdown bubble and your support groups are now recognized in the UK and New Zealand by family law. So whoever was supporting you during lockdown, they are now family, and rightly so. Quickly then, time millionaires and the anti-work movement. So time millionaires is just people saying, and I think everyone's had a life audit during the last 2 years, and we've started reassessing what we want. We've had tragic losses of lives, tragic losses of jobs, so people are saying, how do I want to actually go forward with that? So the time millionaires are saying, well, I want more time to do stuff, and the anti-work movement is not as straightforward as it seems. It's just not, I don't want to work. It is, I don't want to sell my soul to a corporate company and do the 9 to 5, 40-hour work week. There's a bit more to life than that. So we're just starting to see people rejecting that kind of driven culture. And specifically in China, it's called a lying flat or lying down movement, where you will just do the minimum to survive, but I'm not actually going to exert myself and achieve. It's happening in South Africa. We've got some evidence that people are getting their degrees, but then going back to their hometowns and saying, you know what, I'd actually rather prefer a more chilled lifestyle there. And my bellwether here, because I'm out of time, is if you really want to take yourself out, there's a very stylish way of doing this. It was launched in Venice, but it's at a Swiss institute where if you really want self-euthanasia, you can press the button yourself. It looks rather stylish. It floods the pod with nitrogen, so you'll get a bit euphoric and then you'll just drift off and go away. And with that is my state we're in. Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to hand straight over to Bronwyn, and she's going to ask, which reality do you want to choose?
Yes, absolutely. I wonder if I should actually stand up. Yeah, you want me to stand up, right? First of all, it's great fun to be back here today. Let me see if I've got the clicker to work. Fantastic. I'm going to have to turn around a little bit because I got quite a lot of quotes to tell you today. So because Fred didn't actually give me a brief, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about, which is largely asking you to consider the what and so what about a lot of the things that Dion was speaking about. Now, Dion's presentation, we do work together, and that's really a highlight of the trends that we've picked up over the last sort of 12 to 18 months that have kind of arrived now. We do tend to be, perhaps, like we like to say, a few sort of months or even years ahead of what people are talking about. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is what we are going to be talking about for the next sort of year. What are the conversations we're going to be having, and what are the sort of reckonings we have to have personally, professionally, with our companies, and even with our countries? And that's why it's always a good idea to start with looking with the people that you actually respect are saying about what's going on in the world. And Tyler Cohen put out a really interesting blog. I mean, he blogs prolifically. He writes something almost every single day. And he was talking about how, from his perspective, the big trend that he saw over the COVID period, which we are still kind of in, was this increase of variance. In other words, an increase in difference and weirdness. But this difference can be unpacked in many ways. Dion spoke a bit about the difference between rich and poor and how that missing middle is falling out of our socioeconomic societies. There's a big divide in terms of who's rich and who's poor, and big companies and small companies. There's not much space in the middle. This has often playing out also in a very physical sense, in that we've seen people in South Africa in particular, wealthy people literally retreating into citadels, whether it's sort of a waterfall estate or at Danefern or down to little enclaves by the coast, right? So we're seeing a sort of physical separation between wealthy and poorer people. But it's also happening on a more sort of metaphysical level, in that, as Tyler is saying here, with this increase in weirdness and variance, what internet connectivity, and particularly us being sort of stuck at home and having lots of internet interconnectivity over the last couple of years has done, is that it's allowed us to find our weird friends. In other words, to find our little tribe. And that can be both a good thing and a bad thing. As the quote over there says, how this plays out in terms of you're able to be as extraordinary as you like. You're able to have fringe opinions and go and find that very strange tribe. But you're also able to sort of retreat from society with your strange little tribe, with your strange little ideas, and go down various different reality tunnels. And that's perhaps the first thing that we need to sort of think about tonight. That is, where are we heading? And are we losing touch with reality itself as we start to retreat into our physical and totally imaginary little enclaves, sort of leaving the rest of society behind and almost retreating into these little corners where we get to be as strange as we like, but also perhaps sort of separating us from what's going on in the rest of the world. And that brings us to the first sort of trend pair that I want to talk to you tonight, because with trends, it does seem to be that generally there's an equal and opposite reaction for anything that we talk about. And that concept of weirdness on the one hand, but also sameness on the other hand, is something that's been very obvious to notice once you start to see what's going on. In that I absolutely love this photo series. This was from around about, I think it's about 15 years ago. It was a Dutch photographer who stood on the street, and he took pictures every day for many days, and each of those pages you can see there, all those yellow jackets, all those black jackets, all those people kind of dressed the same, were from the same day. And he started to sort of notice that as much as we think that we're very, very individualistic and we're dressing to be very fashionable and we're part of some sort of subculture, there's actually quite a lot of us that end up actually looking like we're wearing a lot of uniforms. I think that's a really interesting image to talk about this concept of, on the one hand, diversity has never been spoken about more, but on the other hand, we also tending to sort of think more globally. Globalization is still increasing. Our economies are that much more connected. There's much less difference between culture here than there would be in a country in Asia or America or Europe. So we're sort of losing some distinctions, really fundamental distinctions, at the same time as we're sort of doubling down on identity markers, the way we dress. So diversity seems to be more and more aesthetic, while at the same time, there's a lot of homogeneity going on underneath the surface. So that's an interesting trend pair to consider. So what is really different and what is really the same? And what are we losing as we try and actually double down on aesthetic diversity without actually thinking about how we're becoming more and more the same underneath? And that brings me to the next really important conversation that I think we're all going to be having a lot more of today, and perhaps it's actually the most fundamental conversation I wanted to speak to you about tonight. And that's this concept of reality privilege. And it's a concept that I'm sure we're all going to hear a lot more of. It's the latest privilege on the sort of circuit. And it came from Mark Andreessen, who, of course, is a very well-known investor. He's also one that coined the phrase of software eating the world. So he does seem to have a bit of sway in the ways that culture and economic conversations are progressing. And he spoke about it in an interview that I sort of read, and I read through the whole long transcript. And he came up with this concept of reality privilege, saying that those of us who have nice lives, who live in nice houses, the same those of us who were able to work on our computers without reducing our living standards and our lifestyles during COVID, have an undue amount of privilege. And he was saying that because so few people in the world really do have real privilege in the real world, that perhaps we should double down on getting technology to the underprivileged in our societies so that they are able to escape and live a better quality of life in the virtual space. So this comment can be viewed in two different directions. If you're a bit more cynical, and I definitely tend to be more skeptical myself, that conversation could be heard to be seen that essentially this very wealthy person, who's one of the richest, most privileged people in the world, is kind of saying to poorer people, the less privileged, the ones without reality privilege, that perhaps they should just eat NFT cake. It's very sort of Marie Antoinette, isn't it? You know, like let them eat NFT cake. Let them have NFTs with whatever tea party they like, and let them put on VR goggles and have a wonderful life in virtual reality, because it's kind of cheaper to solve your problems with imagination and escapism than it is to really solve the real problems in the real world. And that's a really valid criticism, right? Like, are we just papering over real differences in our society with this sort of virtual sort of rose-tinted glasses, right? Just sort of, well, we'll just patch it up. If your house, if you're living in a homeless shelter, it's okay, put on a virtual reality goggles and you can be king for a day, right? So it's something slightly cynical about that. But on the other hand, he does kind of have a point, in that this picture was taken by Sam Altman, who's another well-known, very wealthy VC from America, of a homeless person literally wearing a VR goggle set. And when you start to see people that are living in these sorts of conditions, you do kind of have to say, if that person can be happier, if he is feeling like his life is better when he lives in his virtual reality, when he owns his plots of land next to Snoop Dogg, as Dion was saying, and he gets to be a celebrity in that sort of environment, who are we to deny him the ability to escape from his painful reality? And the same sort of conversations could be had with people that are literally in pain, that might want to escape on a more physical level by starting to take more recreational drugs, which are becoming much more socially acceptable. Who are we to stop people escaping from their flawed physical husks if they can have a better quality of life in an imaginary virtual space? So I'm not going to sort of answer those questions for you, but I'm going to pose them, because these are conversations that we're going to have more and more, and particularly as entrepreneurs. They're questions we've got to ask, like, what problem are we really going to be solving? Are we going to be solving the real problems in the real world, or are we going to choose rather to sort of go into the Band-Aid business, or the VR headset business, which essentially does a very similar job there? And that brings me to the next sort of trend that we can talk about, the trend literally of virtual and augmented reality. But it's also got a flip side here. And the flip side here is this concept of diminished reality, which is starting to creep into tech conversations. So if augmented or virtual reality can let you have a richer life experience by adding layers to what you see and what you experience, diminished reality, much like almost in The Wizard of Oz, where everyone had to wear those literally green-tinted spectacles and looked like they were living in a much better place than it was, diminished reality kind of blocks out or filters out the things we don't want to see. And they've started experimenting with this, which is really, really interesting. And there's a futurist called Amy Webb who has written quite a lot about this. And it's basically like putting on VR goggles, but they'll sort of block out the poverty around you. So you don't have to see the inconvenient homeless people. Or you don't have to see adverts, right? So like a pop-up blocker, but more real life. And that's also something to think about. How much are we sort of averting our eyes from what's going on? And what you can actually see on the screen there is literally a pair of sort of green emerald tinted spectacles that were sold at Sotheby's for many hundreds of thousands of pounds. And this was actually from an old Indian dynasty, but I thought it was a really profound image to sort of talk about, again, the contrast between rich and poor and how we're sort of distorting reality around us, either hiding things we don't want to see or imagining imaginary things that we kind of do want to see or experience. And then it would be disingenuous not to talk, and I know Dion did start to speak about what's going on with virtual reality and all the rest of it, but also about this concept of the play to earn and pay to win economy that's emerging. And here we're talking about the rise of a new class of, if you would pardon my French, bullshit jobs. These are people that are now earning a living grinding in rather meaningless little games, like the quite infamous, let's call it what it is, basically is a kind of Ponzi scheme known as Axie Infinity, where people have to pay money to purchase some of these little monsters that you can see behind me, that they then breed and fight in battles in order to create more monsters to sell to the next people or new players to come into the game. But of course, because it has been designed to be like purely speculative, of course, the price, the entry price to get into these sort of matches, these death matches of tiny little bubble-shaped monsters, keeps on increasing. So we start to see guilds forming, whereby wealthier people will purchase these little creatures from other players who have been grinding at the game and then loan them out to new players. So they get back into that sort of buy now, pay later and the debt trap cycle that Dion was talking about. And that really gets us to question, like, what sort of a society are we building? This sort of performance art of capitalism, right? So you have to perform at a task that's really essentially meaningless just in order to sort of earn an income. And that gets you to start begging questions around things like universal basic income or increases of grants, like we're talking about here in South Africa, because quite often people reject those ideas saying, what are people going to do? Isn't it just going to make people lazy? But if the alternative is people performing like meaningless performance art type jobs, is this really any better? Or are we just repeating the same mistakes in an even more cynical way with Web3 projects that are really being touted as actually being for the social good? Definitely something to think about over there. And then I absolutely love this quote too. It's quite old actually, from Adam Curtis, who's made some really sort of surreal documentaries that you can find on YouTube. And he's talking about how when it comes to politics and government, much like Dion was talking about earlier with like the TikTok warfare and the sort of cyber warfare that we're starting to see all over the place, that what we're really missing now when it comes to politics is the ability to challenge ideas, because we've lost the ability to actually have consensus over anything. I mean, like if you go onto social media on any day of the week, you will have people arguing about the validity of 1 + 1 = 2. We've kind of lost the bottom out of all of our reasoning. Science has been replaced by the science, TM, the sort of the science that said that, for example, we had governments in places like Canada who put out health guidelines that were saying that, you know, with lists of perhaps sexual positions that were COVID safe. I mean, like, you can't really take that stuff too seriously, right? So, like, there's a lot of examples, but I find that one. And on their list was glory holes, for example. And also they recommended not face-to-face, but whatever. The point is that we've lost the ability to be able to really criticize anything, because you can't criticize, you can't debate unless you agree on the basic set of facts about your reality. If you can't agree on what's up and what's down and what's left or what's right, or on a common language, you can't really challenge bad ideas, because the conversation breaks down immediately. If we disagree on what the basic sort of directions are, the basic language that we're using, there's absolutely no defense for the sort of surreality that we find ourselves going into. And yeah, some of you might be familiar with this. This was started by a young Gen Z guy. I think he was around about 20 years old at the time. Started in 2017. This was pre-COVID. He was quite the trendsetter. And he started a fake conspiracy. This might remind you of things like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, which was sort of a cynical religion that turned into a real thing. This guy started a fake conspiracy that birds weren't real, and that in the 1950s and 60s, the US government replaced all the birds in the sky with drones to spy on us. And he did it as a piece of kind of performance art, but it's turned into sort of a life of its own. So this concept of like postmodern reality is really well illustrated by this, and how many young people are sort of proud supporters of the movement, but from a very cynical perspective, but how that art kind of becomes reality, and some people have actually started believing this. It's quite incredible, but that does kind of tell me that Adam Curtis has a bit of a point when we get to that. And that brings me to Ben Hunt, who is another person that I really admire, who asks interesting questions. And he's been talking about the metaverse, and how the metaverse isn't just about augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, Decentraland, and all of those good things, but rather that the metaverse has also got to do with meta itself, or with meta-narratives. He's really interested in how stories are essentially software for human minds, and how stories not only help us to make sense of the present, they also change the future, because what we believe in is we do act on, right? So our expectations shape reality. The stories that we tell each other change the world. And he made this really interesting point that you can see on the screen there, how he was saying that that's not just a metaphysical concept, because actually when we tell stories, the neurons in our brains connect in different ways. So in other words, stories make a material impact on our real life, which I think is a really interesting way to think about the metaverse and how it also plays out inside our own human software in our own minds. And there was a scientific paper I read early this week too that said that actually within our cells are some of the most advanced computing programs that are like even more advanced than our actual sort of hardware, software that we use to program an actual metaverse, or the metaverse as we at least know it today. So I thought that's a really interesting conversation to be had around what software are we programming ourselves, our own personal beliefs, and what software are we using to sort of program the narratives that are guiding our society forward? And Dion and I have spoken about a few of those narratives, and if you disagree with them, I'd encourage you to challenge them, because just talking about these things changes what can be possible with them. And that, of course, brings us back to reality tunnels, what I started with, and how as we sort of go down these sort of global weirding that Tyler was talking about, we're kind of faced with personal facts because we've lost touch with objective reality, but there also are still eternal truths out there, and we kind of have to get back to thinking about what that is, because as I said earlier, if you can't actually have some consensus with which to build new ideas upon, like actual science doesn't work anymore. You kind of have to agree what numbers are in order to build buildings, or build computers, or write programming languages, or write books. We have to get back to actually focusing on what is actually real, on objective truth, and not just only on subjective ideas, which don't actually get us anywhere because we can't move forward with those conversations. And that's also something to think about, this concept that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, the concept of the truth machine. So in our sort of pursuit of trying to get back to some sort of objective reality because we've lost touch with the ability to find consensus, we started trying to replace human relationships and trusts with technologies, with things like blockchain, of course, and Bitcoin, and this idea of immutable truth once it's in a system. But we have to remember that trust within a system is not the same as trust in that system. And that's where everything breaks down. However good your truth machine is at recording immutable ledgers on the blockchain or whatever it is, you still have to trust somebody to put that information into that chain. And very smart people are trying to sort of solve that with things like oracles, but that only works with certain types of information. It doesn't work with all types of information. Quite often with these systems, we do run the risk of kind of turning blockchains even, and various different computer programs, and any technology that we don't understand, because if we don't understand technology, it's essentially magic to us, into false oracles, into garbage in, garbage out, and almost a laundry of lies and bad ideas into truth. And there's some very concerning examples there when we can start to think about things like the sort of carbon credit scores that Dion was talking about. If that information is recorded wrongly in an immutable ledger, that becomes a part of your identity that impacts your access to life and opportunity thereafter. I mean, we've all heard about sort of China's social credit scores and those sorts of things. They take data that's been inputted that you don't necessarily have control over and turn it into a version of a fact. And I think that we should be careful about the limits of technology as trust. Trust really, when it comes down to it, comes down to individuals. And that becomes a competitive advantage for people that can regain trust in individuals. So I would challenge the idea of doubling down on trustless systems when we could also be considering the value of actually reinvesting in trust itself. And of course, it's always good to kind of close this thing off with another great author, of course, Neil Gaiman, who talks about stories again and ideas. And our ideas are hard to kill, particularly if they're bad ones, but they are possible to kill if we want to kill them or change them, or replace those ideas and stories with better stories as we go forward. And that really does make us really think about what we are doing to ourselves as humanity. With technology, how far advanced it's become in just the last couple of years, we've seen how this is changing things around us. We have to remember that we now almost have this infinite possibility to be our own kind of gods, right? We can change reality for ourselves and for each other in very powerful ways, like Dion was talking about earlier with like the killer drones on borders. That's a godlike power, right? The ability to sort of remotely take out enemies from far away. But at the same time, we have to really think as our technologies become more personal, as our technologies become more powerful, what are we kind of giving up on the other side? Because when we start to think about things like those truth machines and all the rest of it, should we really be more afraid about robots and technologies becoming more human-like and giving them more powers? Or should we be more concerned about what we're doing to ourselves and how we are programming ourselves to actually essentially become more robot or computer-like? And that we should think about, because if we are becoming more programmable and more computer-like, we're also becoming more interchangeable, and we're becoming less resilient to actually having a place as a human being in the real world. In other words, we're kind of becoming more at risk of being the guy that's wearing the VR headset rather than the guy that's offering the NFT cake. Definitely something to consider, but I don't want to leave this being too serious. I want to come back to what Dion was talking about with the lab-grown meat. And there was a company that actually did it as a PR stunt in 2017. They put up a website. You can go look at it. It says, eat celebrity meat. They're going to lab-grow salami made out of celebrities. Now, they put a whole lot of celebrities' names on the website, including like Lady Gaga and Madonna. They hadn't actually harvested their cells to do that, but they did it to get the conversation around lab-grown meat started. However, during COVID in 2020, a British artist actually did grow human meat, and he sort of served it to people as part of a performance art project. So this can be done. And this makes us really think about the whole concepts of transhumanism and how we are trying to turn ourselves, as I was saying, into more programmable components. We're almost trying to shave off our humanity, which is difficult to govern from a sort of government or corporate perspective. I mean, it asks annoying things like for 3-day weekends, right, Dion? So, like, if you could have a much more automated person, isn't that better, right? And you can sort of change around your cells. You can eat people if you want to. You can, if you want, sort of take various different gene-altering drugs and treatments to make yourself stronger, smarter, all the rest. You can play around with yourself, right? The questions then become sort of, how much can we change ourselves and change around the parts without sort of losing what it means to be human? And on the more sort of extreme ends of this, again, picking up on what Dion was speaking about with the fertility cliff that many parts of society are reaching, we're now really seriously looking at growing humans in bags, just like, Brave New World. We've already done with lambs. It can be done. We can do it with chickens, with lambs, with just about anything. And people are now seriously considering kind of growing humans as sort of like literal human resources, right? Sort of really separating the human experience from all the nasty biology that we have to go on. So you can be born in a bag and you can die in a pod, as Dion was saying. And it's sort of, we take away all the messiness of humanity. And the question from me to you is if that's really something that we want, or are we perhaps going to maybe lose something along the way? How far can we turn ourselves into products without getting into a little bit of trouble? Who knows? We're going to figure this out as we go along. And Mary Harrington sort of takes this idea to its sort of nth level by saying that in our sort of pursuit of trying to sort of stand out in this world where we're all trying to become this sort of human, interchangeable human resources, we are trying to be different. We try to sort of disguise the fact that we are becoming more sort of guided by those computer programs that are nudging us in certain ways, and the very smart insurers and governments that are nudging us with carrots and sticks to behave in a certain way and do certain things and kind of think alike, by sort of changing our aesthetics, like I was talking about right at the beginning, by trying to sort of reclaim our identity through aesthetic changes, even though as we do kind of understand underneath that we are being nudged to be more human resource-like. And as such, we try and do more and more extraordinary things to try and get attention, even down to the point that Mary was talking about when she wrote this quote about a young woman who gave her kidney very kindly. She donated it to a stranger, but then proceeded to write a whole lot of blog posts about the experience and try to turn it into like a monetary project. And Mary was talking about how we try and sort of commoditize ourselves in order to reclaim our humanity, but at the same time we kind of doing the opposite in reality. We sort of commoditizing and commercializing everything. And there's some things that perhaps shouldn't be commoditized and commercialized, which brings me to sort of cuddle parties. And in Japan, you can hire a hug. If you're very lonely for human touch, in the untaxed society, right? I mean, this is the similar part of the world. So you've like paid people to not touch you, and now you want to pay people to touch you because you realize that you actually are a human being, and you do have needs that go beyond the needs of a computer program or a human resource. This is why we have people, adults paying to literally hug other people. It's not a fetish thing. This is just something that lonely people are now prepared to pay for. And it does really remind us that we are physical creatures and we are more than just meat Lego. And the concept of skin hunger from a psychology and from a medical perspective is really, really interesting. It's something that Dion and I spoke about a lot, and he opened this evening with the mental health crisis. And skin hunger is what happens. It actually affects our immune system when we're not touched by other human beings. It affects our mental health and our physical health. So it wears down our immune system and makes us more likely, ironically, to catch things like COVID. So it's really interesting to think that perhaps after all this, despite all the technologies that we have and all our powers to essentially be more and more godlike with the tools that we have created, maybe at the end of the day, reality is the privilege. And for that, I'm very grateful that you're all here with us this evening. Thank you.
Jeepers, what an amazing 2 presentations. I don't even know where to start. But we are going to have a few opportunities to ask questions. So I'm going to ask our 2 speakers to get back on stage in reality. And I'm going to open it up. Because I am the boss and the CEO of this freaking thing, I'm going to start. I'm going to just quickly ask one question, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody. And there's a bunch of questions from everybody online. So thank you to the very lively YouTube audience. And there's questions coming from actually all the channels, which has been fascinating. So there were a bunch of questions from people. What is a glory hole? But I'm actually going to skip that one. But they can Google. Actually, go to
Or just follow my Twitter.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. So I have a personal question around the thing of you opened up with rage, right? And there's these quotients that we used to, like IQ, and then we had EQ, and I heard the other day of something called AQ, which is adversity quotient, right? And it's basically from teachers looking at kids and measuring the kids on their ability to withstand the adversity that is within reality, right? And so I'm seeing that, and we're seeing that certainly in the community of entrepreneurs and in the workplace and so on and so forth, that these tensions are bubbling over. They're spilling over from their sanctuaries of home into the workplace now that we're moving back into this hybrid reality. What have you seen, first of all, in terms of that trend, and secondly, in terms of, I suppose, how to combat it? Is there anything that you can speak to on those points?
I don't know. I'd rather go with...
You started at the end.
But I'll go back to what Bronwyn says, is that, well, literal skin in the game is we've kind of lost that contact, and I really loved what Bronwyn was saying, and it is that. It's sort of blurred the lines, and I think we've blurred the lines a little bit too far, or we need to pull back a little bit and just have a reality check and to do that. But I do think we've kind of spiraled. So if the 2020 presentation was the politics of rage and polarization, we were there 2 years ago, and the pandemic's just really cleaved that dividing line. We've got to kind of find that middle ground, and as Bronwyn says, we've lost that ability to kind of argue rationally and also accept other people's perceptions and kind of find a little bit of that nugget of some kind of common ground. And like I said before, just be nice. It really is. We need a lot of niceness in the world.
Another way to say it is don't be a dick.
Exactly.
I think it's a T-shirt. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's something that you have to just do one step at a time. And I think it starts with, especially if you are a parent with small children, and not like solving all the problems for your children. This is how you build resilience. That, what are you calling it? Your adversity quotient.
Yeah.
which sounds terrible, because I don't think I want to give a child more adversity. It's more like it should be a resilience quotient, right? Surely. But it means that you have to have the ability to solve your own problems and actually to believe in your own agency, which is something that we spoke a lot about last year. I don't want to repeat myself too much. But this whole concept of agency, you don't use it, you lose it, right? And we've seen a lot of people defer to authority to solve their problems rather than solving it themselves. And my favorite / worst example of that would be the cabbage bandit, which some of you would have heard of in our local news, which was a guy in Pretoria who started planting cabbages on his pavement because he wanted to feed people and himself during COVID. And instead of like solving their problems man to man or woman to woman or car into car or whatever the case was, his neighbors called the police for breaking the bylaws, right? But it just shows that like nobody wants to solve a problem face to face. Right? I mean, like imagine sort of like calling teacher, but you're a full-grown adult. That's someone who has a very low adversity quotient. So you have to start that right from young.
Yeah, let's not propagate that term. I don't think we like that term. But I'm going to go online to an old friend of Heavy Chef, Mongezi Mtati from WordStart, who has this question: what trends are you seeing in how brands reach out to potential customers with the rise of Netflix and other platforms that actually block ads? They don't have ads because they're paid for subscription things. And that obviously now the TV is slowly dying, I guess, to an extent, and possibly speaking to how entrepreneurs can take advantage of this new environment.
Well, in that case, you have to make an ad that's actually has intrinsic utility. Like that's what you have to do. Like the whole like My Creepy Teacher was of course a great example of that. You want an ad that people are going to share willingly rather than an ad that people are going to skip over. So no, your talking heads on YouTube are not really going to cut it.
So doing something that's talkable, I guess, something that's shareable across multiple screens and platforms and channels and so on and so forth.
Entertaining. It's got to add value to your viewer's life. And attention is the scarcest resource of all.
Sure. Okay, so in the audience here tonight, if there are any questions, just wave your hands in there like you just don't care. We have Lucanio over there. So Magic Mo is going to pass the mic to you. And then if you can try and be sensitive to the mic and not spit all over it.
Sure.
Speaking to the guy with the mask.
two questions. The first is a bit of a petty one. I appreciate your project as Flux. I understand it. I think I understand the way you approach it. I've asked you this question before. I always struggle with the lack of referencing the African continent in your trends. I do struggle a lot with understanding where the trends are and how close they are in relation to the continent. And so when I see the diplomacy one and Dion, you talk about Ukraine, right? I think it's a geopolitically very important one. But simultaneously, geopolitically, you cannot not look at Ethiopia, right? The ongoing, for the last 18 months, conflict there has got a significant impact on the rest of the continent, right? The very ability of Ethiopia to maintain the idea of the nation state has an entire impact on the whole Horn of Africa and the rest of the region in East Africa, right? I'm partly asking a question around how you think through the trends and positionality of the continent, right, in them. That's the first. The second one is a much kinder one. Both of you kept referencing plant-based food and climate change. I'm interested to understand how and where you are seeing trends around planetary politics, the rights of plants, animals, minerals, the rights of future generations. How are you seeing that, and how far or near those might be? Thank you.
Okay. So to your first question, just remember that what you're seeing here is a really, really tiny snapshot of the work that we do. So depending on what company or what sector we're working on, especially if we've got these, it's like a subscription thing of trend cards, we actually actively, specifically put for the clients African and South African case studies to do that. The state we're in is a starter for the year, and it is a global snapshot. And our mandate really is to look at a global community and translate those things for clients. So when we do work with clients, it goes a lot deeper with that. So, but thank you for that question, because it has come up before. But it is, this is a really tiny little snapshot of what you see, that what we really do. In terms of the question about the plant-based, is just repeat the question again.
There's a question around planetary politics and the rights of animals, minerals, and
So it didn't make the final edit there because we've got a really short time, and I even went over time. But one of the things is that sentient beings around the world, again, you're seeing a lot of countries pass laws where they are actually saying the one was sort of mollusks and things are actually sentient beings. So we are being impacted around the world by the climate change and all of those, and so those things are changing. So people and governments and policies are really starting to edge towards that. Probably hence the sort of the speeding up of stem cells and plant-based and eating a bit of booty from Lady Gaga or something like that. So.
I'm sure Kanye wants some of that action. So we've got a question from the online audience again. So we've got Tom Basson, pastor@grace.org.za. So hola, Tom. He's a good friend of ours, and people are talking a lot about hybrid, be that hybrid church or a hybrid model of working from home in the office. What are some of the ways that we can get ahead of the curve when it comes to living and working hybrid? Any thoughts on that? I mean, take that.
You've just done a whole thing on it, haven't you?
What realities,
Yeah, it's one of those things that you're just going to have to balance and figure out the difference of the pros and cons. So the conversation I've been having around that with local businesses quite a lot recently is that, again, like ended that off. That reality is the privilege. And by moving towards more remote work, there are essentially a few groups that get left behind there, particularly people who don't have networks within your organization and people that might not have as nice real houses to go back and work from. It depends on your whole structure that you working in today. So I think it's quite important to think about this, particularly in a South African context again, as to if you are going for remote work, what are you doing to connect people across the socioeconomic divide and across the age divide? So we've had lots of conversations again with Gen Z, also here in South Africa, and Dion spoke about some of them also joining this lying flat generation, essentially not wanting to participate in the workforce, not feeling like they can actually get ahead in the workforce. And a lot of that is to do with the fact of how we actually progress up corporate ladders. You build through personal connections. That's where ideas come from. That's where people actually build relationships that sort of take them hand by hand into the next position. And the thing with digital relationships, as soon as we start moving towards more remote work again, is that almost all of our interactions with our colleagues and our superiors and the people that we're mentoring are linear and programmed. There are almost no serendipitous encounters in our organizations, which can lead to greater efficiency, which is the sort of pro side of remote working and all the rest of it that people have sort of doubled out on. But at the same time, you also have a whole lot of people that are sort of cut out of conversations that could be used to progress their career and also to come up with new ideas and innovations for your organization. So that's a topic that we're going to be sort of watching more there. In terms of the logistics of having a hybrid model, as Fred will tell you, that's the hardest of all because you're having to essentially double up on a lot of resources. You now have to have internal office security for your IT and your techs. You're on full file of like cyber warfare issues. You also have to have in-home inspections for your employees. Like Bethia, our colleague who understands a lot about the HR laws in this country, says that if your employees are working from home, that is a place of work. And now you are actually responsible for the health and safety of your employees' home. These are all the questions you've got to work through before you start adopting these sorts of models. And this is why we see very big organizations like TransUnion, for example, now has 3 different employment contracts, and you have to pick one. So you either are an in-office worker, or you are a remote worker, or you are a hybrid worker. And only really the C-suite is a hybrid worker. Everyone else is either in one of those designations. Again, talk about differences and disconnect within your workforce and different almost classes of workers going forward. So anyway, lots to think about.
Okay, I think we've got quite a cool question from YouTube. Sasha has asked, how soon are governments going to lose power to another kind of system?
Well, people are people. People have, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but people do. And we do tend to actually re-centralize as fast as we decentralize. That seems to be our natural tendency. So you kind of have always these equal and opposite forces. So government themselves is unlikely to go away. How we are governed is always evolving. And what those contracts are between state and citizen is continually being rewritten, sometimes in the courts of law and other times on the battlefield. So I don't know if that helps to answer the question, but government's not going away. It might change its name a bit.
Do we have a question? We've got a question in the audience. Magic Mo is going to give you the mic.
Thanks. Put on the mask for this. Everyone can hear me. Yeah, so I'm sorry I was a bit late. You probably covered when we're going to fix COVID, so I guess I'll catch it on the replay. But I'm just interested. I'm in the space of learning and development, and there's a lot of interesting themes there. I'd love for you guys to elaborate on what maybe you're seeing. I can definitely say in our space is that there's an abundance of learning. It's mostly free, easy to access. There's a very big gap in actual mastery. And the opportunity with hybrid, the ability to learn almost anytime and anywhere, there's so many benefits around it, and there's so many trends. And I'd just love to hear from you around what trends are you seeing in the learning space?
All right, so I think that's been the biggest challenge, and if I sort of parallel that with corporate, it's been probably the steepest learning curve in terms of management of a remote workforce, and I think in terms of learning is also doing that rotational learning or rotational classes and everything like that. But this is sort of like a big trajectory, but I think learning has to fundamentally change. So there's already a question that was posed by one of the news feeds that are tech hubs in Africa going to replace universities? Because that's kind of the way we're going. So is that traditional tertiary education, specifically on the African continent, going to be replaced by tech hubs? And that was a very interesting question. And you think, okay, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Overall, I'm not sure. I think we're at such a, let's call it a precipice of the unknown. The pandemic has completely cleaved this dividing line. In terms of work, it separated work from place of work. So that ripple effect is going to go on for a very, very long time, and we don't know, where that's going to go. So I think we're at that juncture where everything's being challenged. And in terms of education, I also think, and I've been saying this for a long time, is just the curricula that we are being put there. I don't think it's the right way to do things. Very much like the 4-day work week or the 30-hour work week and a 5-day work week, it is a layer from a different century, and we are just not preparing people for that. And even I spoke to somebody from a adult learning, so this is a graduate school in Joburg here, and they were saying, and this is one of the mechanics of that. So it's not really answering your question, but it is. But he was saying even in adult learning, it takes the regulators about 3 years or so to approve a new curriculum. And if it's in business, this is a business school, by that time, it's completely obsolete. So you've got to go back and start again. So we're in this sort of catch-22 cycle, and we're kind of down a cul-de-sac, and something's got to give. And I'm not sure what it is or where it's going to give, but something really has to give. And that goes all the way from primary, secondary, into tertiary education. I just think that really needs a big overhaul. It is in certain pockets changing, but I think in your general traditional institutions, it's still stuck in a different century of doing it.
We have another question in the audience.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. I think we can do a deep dive on any of the topics that you've discussed here today, but I do have a question. It's often been mentioned that the way that the pandemic's been managed, we actually have a pandemic of bureaucracy. And it feels to me, to a degree, it's almost like there's this changing world, and governments and systems and organizations are trying to fight it with rules and doubling down on that. I'm wondering if you can comment on what you see on the bureaucracy front and the trends around that.
Yeah, well, that's personally interesting to me because I'm like allergic to bureaucracy and authority and all those good things. But what I've been thinking about lately is that actually, like, bureaucracy serves a purpose in society. Like, it slows things down. It's a buffer to change, for like runaway change. Like, you have to go through all the various different levels of power in order to get really big change to take place in your more stable and secure sort of democracies. They do tend to be slower moving. Now, of course, that can sort of turn from slowing down dangerous change to being completely regressive and holding us back. But there is always that lag in policy, in government, in anything else. And sometimes that lag can actually be a benefit to us in hindsight, even if at the time it feels like it's the opposite. Now, in terms of like responses to COVID, there's plenty to criticize. There's plenty of people who have done that. Some governments probably over-regulated, others probably under-regulated, and we'll never actually know who had exactly the right policy because there was no control group, whatever Twitter tells you. There really was. Everyone was sort of making this up as we went along. We can only see what's broken retrospectively and hopefully learn from it and move forward. But the conversation around bureaucracy is exactly what Web3 is trying, and depending on how optimistic you are, either failing or succeeding in addressing, in cutting out various layers of bureaucracy and replacing it with decentralization. But we have to realize that decentralization is not democratization necessarily, and devolving power doesn't necessarily make things more efficient. And we're starting to see those conversations come into the reality of humanity and governance, which is an imperfect problem that can never be solved to everyone's satisfaction. Whatever people who are writing rule by code and truth machines would have you know, the point is that many of us just simply want different things, like Dion was talking about right at the beginning. Some people think we need to get back to business as quickly as possible. We've had too much authority, and that's the crisis. And other people are very, very afraid and would actually pay good money and give up many more years of their lives in order to feel safer. So I think it's always worth thinking about those things around these conversations, that it's hard to say what's absolutely right and what's absolutely wrong, and what all we can hope to do is to maximize for choice and to keep learning from our mistakes. But no, we can't solve all the world's problems tonight. Sorry.
Well, we certainly can't in 2 minutes because we're running out of time. So we're going to have one more question, and we're going to go to somebody in the audience. And Magic Mo is going to pass the mic.
Thank you so much. Troy Mocheko here from Eclipse Communications. I just want to take us back to that education discussion, and you're talking about the disappearing middle class. And one of the things that has concerned me personally about COVID is how, from an education perspective, it's really, especially a public education perspective, it's really, increasing the divide between the haves and have-nots. I was listening to a discussion on a radio station this morning where they talked about how, your middle class, you're doing online learning, all of this type of thing. Considering the fact that the country is in desperate need, like you say, to change the education system, do you think this could spur a catalyst for change and move away from, like you say, we have a very knowledge-based work environment, to almost a more artisanal or vocational type of environment, which is what the country actually in many respects needs as well? What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Okay, so, all right, in really quick, try and squeeze it in quickly. Last year we came out with a new edition of post-pandemic tribes that were emerging. So one of the things that we found out, and we focused specifically on youth groups in South Africa, and one of the tribes that we actually identified were called the new artisans, and we saw not only young people, we call them the LBPs, living back with parents, so that's like a boomerang generation that happened with the millennials in 2008, and now it's happened again with Gen Zs. So you're seeing that, but then what you're seeing, and it was specific to South Africa, was a lot of people saying, I'm not just sitting around and doing nothing, I'm going to do something artisanal. And here that's kind of my hope. I'll put my beauty queen hat on and say, the children are our future, because Africa is a Gen Z continent. It's not a millennial continent. So you're seeing a very, very different behavioral pattern coming from Gen Zs from the entire continent. And if you look at the sort of the entrepreneurial spirit and all of that, which goes back to the education system, is specifically if you look at a Gen Z and a Gen Z continent, you see a very strong entrepreneurial spirit and always a side hustle. There's always a side hustle to do something. And even now, we've got so many case studies of young African people from the DRC, from Kenya, doing and inventing amazing things. So to just kind of couch where you're going, with that in terms of education, we are seeing a very, very different way of doing things. So if you go from the top and start working down towards a younger generation or a new workforce as well, I had this whole discussion this morning with a corporate, is that your employment contract has already changed during pandemic, because it used to be, I'm the employer, you're the employee, and it's a one-to-one contract. In a deeply unequal society like South Africa, we've now realized that employment contract has to go further than that one individual. You have to take into account what that familial situation is, what that community situation is, and what that person's home environment is, because when we discovered so that everybody was going to work from home, we understood that in South Africa, not everybody can do that. You don't have the hardware, you don't have the Wi-Fi, you don't have all of those kind of things. So now, for HR, it is a really big challenge to start really thinking about what those, and rewards and benefits in terms of employees have completely changed. So what I'm trying to say is that the pandemic has started rattling the cage in certain echelons, and it's going to start coming down. But on the other hand, on the entire continent, you've got a generation that is coming up and moving and shifting things very, very differently. That of just a different mindset of learning and how to do things, as well. So I worked with a really big multinational, especially on the African continent, and the CEO said something that really was the first time I said, wow, there's a CEO that really thinks well. He said, when they look at the different markets in Africa, they assume that each of those markets are first world or developed markets. And he said it was because of interconnectivity. That's the leveling of the playing fields. But he said, once everybody's got that connectivity, and especially with a young demographic in Africa, you can't, as a big brand, a Pan-African brand, say, well, if it's happening here, it's not going to reach Ghana or something like that, because somebody will see it on social media, they will do that. Some entrepreneur will pick it up there and say, well, why is it not happening in this country? And he says he can't risk the market share loss because of that entrepreneurial spirit and the way different things are leapfrogged on the African continent. So it's a very long answer to that, but I hope that gives you some kind of insight of, I think the pandemic has given us a really good shake that was needed, and let's see where the apples fall from the trees now. Okay.
Dion, Bronwyn, that was amazing. That was terrifying. It was also inspiring and I think very thought-provoking, and certainly gave us another year of really fruitful thinking just to go through, and I think certainly with this community, you know, these bright-eyed entrepreneurs, there's so much to look forward to as well as reflect upon, with a bit of caution, but and I think to think carefully about how we treat one another. I think that's one of the themes that came through quite strongly. And with that in mind, I also want to thank everybody here just for coming out and getting amongst it. I specifically want to thank my team who are helping. We've got Justin, Yolandi, we've got Makanyo, we've got Louis, we've got the bunch of people, very, very smart folks behind the screen, sitting at laptops across South Africa at Heavy Chef. And I'm really proud of the team just for pulling together and putting together such an amazing product. Want to thank all our partners and for everybody just for supporting the cause and really putting the entrepreneur at the center of all of this. I think it's such a noble thing to do, and we really support everybody who is out there in the trenches, rolling up their sleeves, doing their 10,000 hours and changing our economy from the bottom up. So thank you guys. Hope to see everybody mixing it up, having a glass of wine or CBD water, and hope to see some of the live stream crew here in person. And as we start to see people filter out into the real world again, it's going to be great to connect. So thank you guys, and thank you to our amazing speakers. Cool. And that's a wrap. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Well done.
Life is a journey. We are all traveling. Kure kwanda koi koi koi. Here I have been traveling. Life is a journey. We are still traveling. Kure kwandi koi koi koi. We're all still traveling. Kanango mayorira na so terera. Boda izirango mena so pembera. Ubenye udukudu kumwanawe. Recollect my friend. Kanango mayorira na so terera. Kanango mayorira na so terera. Boda izirango mena so pembera. Upenye wudu kudu kumwana we. Break a leg, my friend. Can I go my yorira not so terera? Life is a journey. Yeah, we are all traveling. Good wonder, go. Yeah, I have been traveling. Whole life is a journey. We are still traveling. Good body, no and I go. Yeah, we are all still traveling. Kanango mayorira not so terera iwe. Roda izirango not so pembera iwe. Upenye wudo kudu kumwana we. Break a leg, my friend. Kanango mayorira not so terera iwe. Kanango mayorira not so terera iwe. Roda izirango not so pembera. Upenye wudo kudu kumwana we. Break a leg, my friend. Kanango mayorira not so terera iwe. Traveling. I have been traveling. We're still all traveling. Yes, I have been traveling.